now I can't find my screen. Oh, there we go. Kia ora, everyone. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We think we're a bit jinxed here at Lunch to Learn, that there's always something that happens. So kia ora, everyone. Welcome back to the new year. It's great to have you all here. Just a quick intro from me. My name's Donna Smith. I teach as a professional practice fellow down in Dunedin. And the other members that we've got here, we've got Jane and we've got Kati as well. So we're just going to start off with a quick introduction about what this is, and then we're going to hand over to the lovely Amy, who's our speaker for today. So the Lunch and Learn program is part of the Neurodevelopmental Clinical Network, which comes under the umbrella of the Paediatric Society of New Zealand. And as you'll see on the slide there, PSNZ is an organisation of health professionals that are working on improving health and well-being for tamariki and rangatahi. So one of the things we do is this Lunch and Learn. There's also educational grants available and discussion boards, interest groups and conferences as well. So if there's more information on the website there. Oh, I zoomed through that, didn't I? And how this works is we catch up every second Thursday of the month. So we have a speaker and then we follow up with more interactive knowledge translation session, with the focus being on, rather than us just giving information or giving knowledge, that we're wanting to actually look at getting people changing practice and applying that knowledge as well. So I'm going to hand over to Jane to introduce our lovely speaker today, Amy. The other thing in terms of being interactive with this is we will have the chat running. So I will we'll keep an eye on that. So we've got some questions. We'll aim to have a quick time for some questions potentially at the end of Amy's presentation, or otherwise we highly recommend you come back in a month's time where you get a session to share, discuss and learn further. So
thanks, Donna. So I'd like to welcome Amy. Many of you may know Amy Hogan. We're really grateful to have you speak with us today. So Amy's got 20 years of experience in the disability research, advocacy and policy development with a focus on health and social justice. Amy lives with cerebral palsy and she's worked for the Cerebral Palsy Society of New Zealand for many years. She holds a first class honours in Masters in Psychology. Well done, Amy. And in 2025, Amy is going to be holding leadership roles, including the co-chair of the Australian and New Zealand Cerebral Palsy Strategy, the co-chair of Access Matters Aotearoa, a board member of the Australasian Academy of Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine, and a member of the Auckland Council Disability Panel. And she's focused on leveraging her unique personal and professional experience for international collaboration and strategic advocacy. And we are so grateful to have you speak with us today. And as Donna said, Amy's going to join us again in a month's time. So come back again for more gems from Amy and discussion then. And we might not have much time today, so please do put comments or questions in the chat and we'll delve deeper into those when you come back next month. Thanks so much. Take it away, Amy.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, Amy, so you can pop your slides up. Here we go.
Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Putting on my timer so that I don't run too far over time. So thank you for that lovely introduction. Makes me sound halfway decent, doesn't it? So what I'm going to talk to you today is a particular chapter of my thesis, specifically around a space for chronicity and rethinking cure narratives in childhood onset disability. So you've already heard about who I am, but my thesis topic was essentially around what makes the idea of experimental treatments and the idea of cures so impactful and so meaningful in the space of chronic illnesses and long-term conditions. So, essentially speaking, the term cure has been around as long as the idea of health has been around. And from a purely biomechanical standpoint, cure is the notion of no longer being ill. So we have the discussions around curing cancer, curing the common cold. I don't know if the common cold or curing cancer will come first. Seems to be a bit of a mystery doing both. And the idea of alleviating symptoms. And that is very much the place that cure should be. But over time, the idea of cure has morphed and become a lot more comprehensive and a lot different from those original understandings. There is this notion that we can cure and alleviate just about anyone of anything if they're willing to often put in the perceived effort. And that very much ties into the ideas which I'm going to introduce around healthism and the idea of the supremacy of being healthy. My thesis specifically did not look at life limiting conditions. I specifically focused on long term conditions because that was very much where my interest in how the idea of cures were overworked and overused came from. And specifically targeted to this audience, I wanted to look at how does the notion of cure come into modern pediatrics and modern pediatric understandings? So, a note on definitions. Healthism is a term that was defined by Robert Crawford in 1986, and it's basically around the idea of transferring the responsibility of health onto the individual rather than allowing the state to intervene. And throughout my thesis, I, being the language geek that I am, came up with a few terms of my own around the hostility that is driven around people who live with long-term conditions who aren't actively seeking a cure. The idea of a hostile ecosite comes from the idea of the ecosystem. So the idea is that it's very, very difficult for individuals and their families to simply live in a space without seeking curative elements to their conditions. And curative violence is a term by a South Korean sociologist and researcher around some of the lengths and extremes that can be gone to in order to seek the idea of cure. And defining chronicity can be a challenge. There isn't a set, there's a set clinical definition, but the idea of chronic and chronic illness has very much morphed and evolved into many, many different things. And the idea of living with a chronic condition is very hard for people to reconcile, particularly when the baseline is considered to still to be very, very healthy and reflecting health. And again, because I'm such a geek, I made up my own language. I mean, Shakespeare isn't the only one who can do that. So when I was talking to participants and doing the work within my media review for my thesis, a lot of the narrative was around that simply existing and being ill or having a chronic condition or a long-term condition wasn't acceptable from a social perspective for the individual experiences. It wasn't acceptable to wider society, and it was very difficult for people to maintain their roles. And this came through in a lot of my online content analysis where there were things around for people that had gained a disability later in life. They said things like, I've lost all sense of normal, I've lost all sense of myself. And the people that had a longer term condition would say, I just want to be normal, I just want to escape XYZ condition. And this very much has an impact on funding structures and medical frameworks around the idea of letting people sit. with their conditions. And please admire the artwork that I and my much more talented friend slaved over to get. And this is the idea of the narratives that people are subconsciously or consciously absorbing when they live, that them or their family member live with long-term conditions. And the idea of that the burden of the condition will be alleviated once you get to healthy or normal. And in its specific sense, I'm not asking people to completely absolve the idea of seeking cure or best level intervention. Like there's a whole spectrum of intervening, right? It's the idea that there can be space for not doing a lot of that too. That's most important from my thesis finding. And if anybody really wants to read my 200-page thesis, you're more than welcome to, or I can just send you a nifty little abstract. Either way, I'm fine. So language matters. And I feel like I can speak to this as somebody who's spent my life in the healthcare system. Two of my former physios are actually in the room. Yay! Don't worry, I'm not saying anything bad. But in the sense of there's a lot of language that seeps into pediatrics in particular, but all medicine that is very much based on that there is a baseline and you need to return to it. And over my lifetime, it's definitely got better. Like I think about the stuff that I was taught and people would say to me when I was 5, 10 versus what they say to me when I'm in my 30s, but there's still very much a prevalence around correcting gait, around achieving milestones, around restoring function. And a lot of that is around the sense of overcoming that seeps very much into even everyday practice, and even because a lot of our textbooks are built around this kind of language. So what comes after the idea of like hostile ecotype, the idea of response for a cure, that being the best version of a person with a long-term condition that you can be, the better. And there's huge pressure to pursue as many interventions as possible. Often, in my mind, the idea of neuroplasticity and the idea of the golden 5 years has a lot to answer for, because a lot of our families feel huge pressure to reach that five-year milestone without pause or delay. And the next level of that, this is an insider joke because no person with CP I've ever known has ever been able to cross their legs like that in their lives. And many, many people have tried for me over the years. But there is this idea that children inhabit the idea of what I term performing normalcy, the ability to perform the normal expectation. So some of the most it's terrible. I don't know if will be a surprise to anybody in the room, but I live with classic cerebral palsy. I like to say that I'm a purebred spastic, and I can be the only one that gets away with that because I do have spasticity up to the gills. Although according to my latest video, there could be a bit of the other stuff in there. So you never know. But so very much there was this idea around like can Amy walk? And that was very much saturated into a lot of my early dialogue. And if you go onto YouTube, some of the most popular videos connected to cerebral palsy are of kids walking to their children. There's a particular one that grinds my gears where it's a young girl walking to her military father. Maybe because it's just American, but it's very much has that kind of internalized pressure that can occur for children as well as adults. And this is just a joke for my physios in the room. as a learning tool, and we could potentially discuss this during my second session, but W-sitting is one of the aspects of life that could come under the normality thing. Like people have all these agonies over W-sitting, and as you can see in the first couple of photos, this was me W-sitting and looking very cute with my quad six, if I do say so myself. And then the last one is of me with 3 other physio students, convincing my hips to go into cross-legged sitting. So there's a lot of work that goes into me being able to sit cross-legged. But there's still importance in being able to W-sit and be stable and get through your everyday life. Sorry for the non-physios in the room, that's probably a bit boring, but the principle is that how people manage to do things is important as well as to consider, just like the international classification framework acknowledges. It's important to consider how people do things as well. And I can hear you all talking to me, screaming internally saying, but Amy, parents talk to me about cures all the time. And or if they're not necessarily talking about cures, they're talking about curative elements, like the idea that their child will be able to walk, their child will be able to permanently do particular functional steps. I know because they come to me all the time and ask the same questions. The core element of my thesis and this talk isn't that people shouldn't be striving for the best. They shouldn't be striving for the best technology or the best wheelchairs that come out of Scandinavia. My thought and concern is for all the parents that are never able to afford all the latest fundraising for the latest experimental treatment, but still feel a tremendous amount of guilt because they can't access these services. And I know this is happening because they come to me really upset because they can't do hyperbaric oxygen or whatever the latest thing is, and not being able to leap from potential thing to potential thing to potential thing. So yes, I am an idealistic fool, and slightly proudly so, but also it's the idea that hopefully we can extrapolate and pull apart the idea that, and this is another one of my very drawings that I'm very proud of, cure and the idea of getting past the condition can be part of the equation, not all of the equation. And the families that can afford to do an average level of therapy feel less terrible about having to do an average level of therapy. And the and there can be ways in which we can incorporate different narratives around how we seek what's best for the child isn't necessarily making the disability as less obvious as possible. Yes, and again, health. These these ideas aren't ever malicious or deliberate. They weren't when I was doing old school physio back when I was getting scholarships to go to the Plato Institute and things. Nobody nobody necessarily consciously embodies these a lot. At least the good pediatrics doesn't. But there is a lot of creepy language and language creep and normative creep around this stuff. And the shifting the ideas around Peter Rosenbaum quite likes me, so I have often thought whether or not there should be a couple more F words that are considered around of like, would it be sensible to freeze and just look at what everything's been going on and to get a sense of where all the stresses are from? Or is there room to float? So the idea of just floating in an everyday level of movement and functioning and day-to-day life, if therapy is getting just too much or too overwhelming, and can this be introduced and encouraged? And again, this is creating a space for the idea that you can just be as a person living with CP or whatever other condition, and and again, it's all the stuff, around child-centered goals and all that, but in a more broad sense, it's about, like, how do we make a sense of what actually living with a disability is like, and creating a relationship with the disability that isn't hostile, deliberately or not. Like, and there's a lot of work to go into that. And I'm not expecting you to solve it in this session or the one coming up in a month. But the idea is, how do we understand, and what framing is used for interventions. And I was asked to come up with a couple of discussion-y questions. So here you go. And this is just, again, some ideas. And it's to spark ideas rather than saying you need to do this or you need to do that. Cool. And so I will be bringing the steps for this into teachable steps, probably. I hope. I have a whole month to figure that out. And physios and allied health, I forgot to add everybody else's acronym into that, but it's very much play a role in redefining these narratives for individuals and their families. Thank you. I can breathe now.
Well done, Amy. You're like snuck in under time as well. Whoop, whoop.
Radical.
Amazing. So as we had a little bit of discussion going on into the chat, Kate has put the link to Amy's thesis, so you can click straight onto that, and it's got an abstract and then the full thesis.
I forget that it's probably published and everything. I don't even need to do that.
Look at that, yeah. And then I think there's a couple. I'm just trying to see. There was a lot of stuff going on in the chat.
Can I just ask, Amy, could you remind us what the questions were that you were?
Oh, of course.
Posed?
Sorry,
because that slide went quickly, and I think it's good to.
I'm too ahead of myself. I'm too efficient. There we go. And from current slide. Oh, nope. There we go.
Yep.
Oh,
sorry. Am I still sharing?
No, yeah, you're sharing. It's good.
No, that's great. So again, if we're looking at things for discussion for next time, so again, in terms of the language that we're using, looking at space for chronicity in terms of health within the health profession field as well. And then the other things that have come up in the chat is having a discussion about the use of float and freeze and how we could actually incorporate that in as well. And the other
I haven't actually asked Peter permission to do that, so I will email Peter. He's totally fine. He liked me well enough, so he'll probably let me do it.
Well, you can do your own little mini survey on what we talk about next month about freeze and float.
And I think that was the other comment that was just in the chat from Fee, was just saying that if you're looking at the ACC equivalent in Australia, she was saying that there's a lot of push for ongoing therapy and more is better, and that's a really important concept in terms of care fatigue and things as well.
And what particularly worries me about the Australian model, Fee, is that there's so much emphasis for to use a CP example, the GMFCS level 1s and 2s, which is good because they get under acknowledged, but they also can get over therapized very quickly because you, particularly for the 1s and 2s, you don't want them walking abnormally for too long with a too abnormal gait, but there's so much emphasis with the NDIS system.
Although, Amy, I'm working with the NDIS system at the moment.
Oh,
and
hooray.
Oh.
Thoughts and prayers,
I have to say, for example,
Mm.
I wrote in requesting a wheelchair for a 3-year-old child who had no head control, couldn't sit, and so on. And it was rejected immediately because I hadn't demonstrated why they needed a wheelchair. My report was 10 pages long and had quite a lot of detail about that this child doesn't have head control and doesn't have sitting ability. But I still had to rewrite it again so that there was enough information there for them to see that the child actually had no other way of getting around except being carried by parents. And I'm now having children who have lifelong conditions who are having to go back through the whole assessment process again to prove that, a specific example, that they still are an amputee. So it's quite, there's things that could be better with the NDIS.
Yeah, but
sorry, I was gonna sort of pose a question or something for the group to go away and consider, that, you know, of all the people that are attending here, you know, there are allied health professionals, but they're also, you know, they're not where this group of people here, there are academics, there are people working in health, there are people working in education. And I think that first question that you've got, what language do you use when discussing therapy goals, that the context of the people that are here, the setting that you're working in, and are you discussing therapy goals with the child or with the parent, and you know, what environment are you working in to be considering that? I think your words on freeze and float, about thinking about health chronicity and the overarching themes from your research about cure, is something for us to really be like, before we even discussing therapy goals, there's something about self-reflection, about where we're sitting and how does that land for you from a professional point of view, but also the work or clinical context in which you're working. I think that's...
And also, if I could just add a final thought, Jay, is the idea that language isn't neutral. Like, I gave my friend Anna Mackey, who I think all of you know, I think I vaguely horrified her once when I said that when people would give me like the 6-minute walk test or the XYZ test, all I heard was that I needed to succeed at this test, and it was a pass or fail. It wasn't, because Jane and Anna are two of the nicest physios I've ever met, but I internalized a lot of that because that's just who I was. And I'm a professional geek who loves gold stars. So it's like, and one of the things that I think we need to be really mindful of, going back to Philippa's idea, is that the idea of the mobility change from going to, say, walking into a wheelchair. People can't handle the fact that I can walk okay, I can walk fairly well. I just choose to use a wheelchair because of energy expenditure. But there's so many that will view being in a wheelchair as a failure. And traumatized parents, for example, have said, I don't want my child to end up like you because I want them to have a shot at life and to be normal. And that hurt, let me tell you, but I recognized it as the words of deeply traumatized parents who had incorporated this idea that the only way for their child to be happy, was to minimize the disability as much as possible. And when I say minimize the disability, I don't mean factors like discomfort and factors like pain, because that's different, but so much emphasis goes on the biomechanics of walking, for example, that I think things like swallowing, digestion, and temperature control can be overlooked in therapy goals. And what you think is a neutral exchange of saying, you're here, Amy, and we want to consider getting your ankle to this level, is not necessarily a neutral statement for a family of professional geeks that I come from. All my parents would do is internalize all that and say, how do we do things better? So
I think I think understanding, you
Yeah.
know, your concept or the concept on the definition of hostile ecocide, and also really reflecting on the word burden.
Yes.
I think it's really important for us as clinicians working together with people with lived experience and their families. You know, you've spoken about being normal and that pressure from internally and from society, and also the that burden aspect. I think that's really important for us to be considering
And
our questions about this.
And the relationship to disability, because people have internalized quite a hostile relationship to their disability. And don't get me wrong, if I could cure CP tomorrow with a magic wand, I would, but it's not the same as constantly thinking about it and constantly striving to minimize it. Like it's a both and scenario, whereas the thinking is quite binary in a lot of sense. It's either or. And which is why I think that a lot of the discourses around mild CP and severe CP are quite problematic as well, because some of the most well-supported kids I ever knew were level 5 and beyond. And some of the most afflicted by the normalcy curse were the level 1s and 2s who would absolutely wreck their hips doing paper rounds and things, because that's what you did when you were growing up in the 80s or 90s. I don't know what the modern equivalent is now, but they would absolutely destroy their hips and their ankles because that's what you did. So yeah, that's the position that I'm coming from. And sorry, this was a little bit CP centric, people, but I think the same principles apply for other conditions.
So we've got a few other questions going in the chat as well. So Amy, I'm going to connect you up with Fee Graham afterwards.
You're going to stop me rambling.
If you know, it's great rambling. But Fee, I'll connect you up with Fee. She's got a few questions carrying on about language and the use of occupational like performance and a few things around that as well. And I think the rest of them should we leave till next time, Jane?
Yeah,
there's a good question from Karen as well. Yeah.
So what happens for us organising the lunch and learn is that we have to wing it on the next knowledge translation session. If 34, 37 people attend, it's quite hard for everybody to chat. And so depending on how many people turn up to the next session, we'll do some breakout rooms and maybe have some of these questions. I think Amy might be able to look at some of the questions in the chat, and we might break into little groups and then come back and share the information. So don't worry that you're in a group discussing a question that's not the one you wanted to discuss. So if not many people come, we'll just stay in an open forum like this. It's not recorded. So if you really want to have good ongoing discussion, you've got to come back next time. So
and is this chat saved so I can keep some of the questions so I can think about them?
Yeah, we'll do that. I think Donna, you've done that, saving the chat before, haven't you? Or we can ask Catty to just copy and paste it. We won't stop the Zoom, but we hope everybody has enjoyed attending today. And I think you've got your last slide, haven't you, Donna?
No, because I think the questions were slightly different to the ones that Amy's posted.
Okay,
so
perfect.
We thought we'll stick with those ones. But we are. Our next session is closed everything.
I think it's March the 9th. No, March the same 11th. March 11th.
Yep, same time, same place. Yeah.
Cool. I'll be there. And if I'm really, really contactable, like Jane and everyone has my email. So if anybody is super keen to talk to me about anything in particular, just reach out to these guys and I'll give you an email. Thank you so much for attending. Yay!
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. See you in a month.